All right, thanks, Bud. Thanks for having me. Made the trip up from Baltimore. It was great to be here. So tonight I thought we all spend a lot of time hopefully writing code, so I'm going to spend more time on, what do you want to call it, the human aspect of it. Why do we make decisions? As Bud said, there's so many tools to choose from these days. Why do you go with Jekyll over Roots, over Spike, over Harp, over whatever you want to call it? How do you arrive at these decisions? Talk more about that as opposed to actually showing code. If you want to get into code, we can do that too, but I'll leave that mostly to Jeff later on. So before we get into it, we're talking about one specific site that a small team around me took from MT, MovableType. Anybody familiar with the old days? MovableType, right? We put it over to Jekyll, and then I took it upon myself to take it over to Roots. We got Jeff here tonight as well, the creator of Roots. Very honored to have him here. Great all-around tool. Before we get into it, a little bit about myself. I started on the web right around the time when Microsoft transitioned from ASP.NET, not from ASP to ASP.NET. Anybody remember that? The good old days, right? Classic, what they now call, or used to call back then, classic ASP and then ASP.NET. So they put out a sample application called iBuySpy, iBuySpy Portal. Anybody heard of that? Probably not, right? So they wanted to show off what ASP.NET could do. A guy in Canada by the name of Sean Walker took that and built a open source CMS around it called .NET Nuke. You may be familiar with the nuke ending, PHP nuke maybe, right? That's where that came from. So that grew very quickly. I jumped on that, and as I was preparing... Okay. Yeah, I don't know what it was about that, right? So he probably regrets it to this day. That's why probably they shortened it to DNN. Either way, that's how I got started. And as I was preparing for the talk, I was thinking, CMSs was kind of the tools to blame for me, it took me so long to actually build a website from scratch, right? You could just log in and move a few things around and drop stuff. Obviously, back then, you had to worry about connection strings and databases, which, while we're here, we don't have to do that anymore. But at least you still did not have to start from the very beginning to do publishing on the web, right? So me personally, my story, I've only written code extensively for the last 2 or 3 years. I'm still biting myself for why it took me so long, but it just did. It just did. I've been working on it. I built a whole business around DNN. I spoke at national conferences around it. So I've known the CMS space for a long time, but only started working or writing code myself for the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah, a little bit of an intro now. Recently, I started at AOL. I'm writing JavaScript now for a big Angular application. Early Light Media, that's the site. Let's take a quick look at it so we all know what we're talking about. This is the blog page, earlylightmedia.com, a small video production house in Baltimore. The founders have, they're all journalists, so very journalistic background. Small team, 5 people. Having gone into shorts film recently, have won lots of awards. So that's the site that we took. Earlylightmedia.com again, if you want to browse it, that's what it looks like today. If you go to GitHub, Early Light Media organization on GitHub, you will see both sites. The Jekyll, the first version, both are open source, and the currently in production Roots version. You can browse all of that, just go there. This slide is more so we're all on the same page of what we're talking about. There's nothing really going on here if you look at that, right? Very typical small business site. Nothing fancy at all, really. So you need a blog, you need to showcase their work. Case studies are more involved showcases of their work, And then you got your auxiliary pages that you always have, right? Really nothing fancy. That's all there is. I put this timeline up just to get us a little bit into the context, all right? When all this happened, what happened right around that time, right? You're all familiar with these. You actually, when you go to my slides, I'll post them. You can just hit P and there's actual links to these kind of things. Or you can just Google, right? How we build CMS-free websites, developer seed, early. That's got to be one of the, I mean, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's got to be one of the first going into describing what the future will hold, right? 2012. Then we got the Carrot Code Journal, Building Static CMS. That was honestly where the light bulbs went off for me. Hopefully you've all seen that. If not, especially this diagram right here, right? Let's see if I can blow this up a little bit. When I saw that, that's when it took off. That's when it made sense for me. You've all seen the responsive web design article for Ethan Marcotte. That article I would compare to this, obviously in the static space. That's what that means, for me personally. Stay close. And that was when? Like 2 years later, right? And right around that time, I was working for a small startup. My wife still runs it. By the end of this presentation, you will know why I'm no longer there, because I have no business sense at all. But right around that time, we started talking to Early Light Media. They needed to redo the website. When I say we, a good friend of mine by the name of Vasilis, he's Greek. I've known him for a number of years. He's been a great friend and mentor to myself. I started talking to him, right? What are we going to do? What was the first thing that came to our mind? What did we do back then? WP, right? Best. What else are we going to do, right? Small websites, heavy on the blog. We might as well do WordPress. Everybody does it. That's the thing to do. Do we really want to do that? Not really, but that seems like the way to do it. A few months later, we proceeded, not with WordPress, but with Jekyll. First commit then, and we'll get more into the history later. Everything went on to Jekyll. It was a great experience. And then a little more of a year later, I took it upon myself to take it off Jekyll and move on to Roots. So when we were faced with that decision, what we really knew was what we didn't want to do, right? We did not want to do WordPress, right? It seemed like what everybody else was doing. We had built plenty of sites on it. We were familiar with it. Vasily started to get into Ruby on Rails. He started experimenting for his own blog with, he recently found Jekyll. It's great. He found GitHub pages, told me all about it. In the contract with Early Light Media, it literally says WordPress. And my wife haunts me to this day why I pulled the rug out under her, right? How can you make such a decision? Right? It's a typical developer thing, I would say. We went for it. We went for it, and we did. So that's all nice and good, right? Jekyll gives us, as you probably know if you're here, if you're into static sites, any other static stuff, everything is version controlled. I live in my text editor, great, right? Especially for me, working in WordPress, I don't have all the stuff that I'll never touch, right? Lean, great. What's the one thing in the early days of static that was out there, waiting to be solved? What was that one thing that had us worried? Anybody?
Authoring new posts. Like non-technical people writing new posts.
Exactly, right? How do non-technical folks maintain their website, right? That's what WordPress translates for me in my head, right? It's great. Non-technical people can maintain their content themselves, right? What are we going to do here? And especially with them coming from MovableType, right? They had a hard time doing anything on the site. So that was very important. it is just a thing, right? Not just for this client. That's just something that is expected these days. For various reasons. I don't want to maintain that content for the rest of my life, and they want to have control, right? They want to pay for something, and there it is. Honestly, we did not have an answer. We just didn't. Is that smart from a number of angles? From a developer angle, from a business angle? Probably not, right? We did not have an answer. We went with Jekyll anyway. Well, we figured we'll figure it out. We'll just build it. We'll figure it out eventually. And I was aware of these things, like they existed. It's not something we had to invent. It was there. Maybe we weren't ready for it. I personally wasn't ready for it, right? You could ask me, well, you knew about this resource. Why didn't you go with roots right away? I checked them out. I wasn't ready for it, right? I looked at it and I was like, holy, wasn't. We just came off of, that's another thing, we just came off of a Shopify project, right? So if you're familiar with Jekyll and Liquid, the templating language came out of Shopify. So that transition made it very easy to get into Jekyll. And for me, to be honest, if I think about it now, like I wanted to write straight up markup, like just from a markup perspective, I wanted to write HTML. I looked at Roots and Jade. I'm like, what are you doing? I just learned this, right? And now you're changing it up again. Right? Let me just figure this out first. Right? It's just too far removed. That was my side. And Vasilis is a Rails guy anyway. So the whole bundler and gems and all that stuff, that was just like second nature to him. So off we went, right, at Jekyll. Any questions? Interrupt me anytime. So all we really knew, we did not want to do WordPress really. Neither one of us. I checked earlier today. It must have been around. It wasn't even 3. Somewhere around 2.9 of Jekyll, if that matters to anybody. And again, it's all up on GitHub. You can still browse it. It's not, the site's not running there. The code is there. And it was great, right? If you're familiar with Jekyll, for the blog, comes out of the box. We had one, if you look at the config file, we had one extra collection for the work items and the work items and the case studies, right? So the blog comes out of it. And then one extra collection to make the showcase of videos work. That was really it in terms of configuring Jekyll. Lots of includes, lots of them. Made that work. So if you want to browse the repository, take a look at that. Other than that, nothing really. It worked great. Liquid was cool, a little cumbersome. But again, my background, just making the transition, just started teaching front-end stuff, getting into it. It was just a great way to get started. If you just want to compare the config file in what is it, config.yaml and Jekyll, go over to app.coffee or app.js, right? Just like a straight-up text file versus a JavaScript file. You know, there's really not much you can do. I haven't looked in Jekyll for quite a while, but it was a great way to just get started on the web in general. They just removed most of the stuff. You got Sass, great, works. Run with it, right? That's where it fell down. We built the site, we got it out there, it's all nice and good, right? But we still had that one lingering problem, your problem, right? How do we ultimately hand this over? Has anybody done any research, looked into Contentful plugins on Jekyll? I looked again before the talk, and it's still very weak, right? Contentful has one, and they did one themselves. I can't even explain whether you can actually call it an actual straight-up Jekyll plugin. And then there's a third-party one that hasn't been touched in years. I played with both of them extensively. I put 2 repos up and just kicked the tires, played them all. And what I came out of it is you almost needed a merge of the two. Because the third-party one the guy in Europe put up, it creates pages based on content types. So based on the number of content types, it gives you a number of pages. And the Contentful one, what does it do? It dumps all your data into a data file, into the data.yaml or data.csv in Jekyll's data file. So it grabs all the content and dumps it into the data file, and then you can grab it from there. Does it work? Probably for a small project, but it seems like very cumbersome. I mean, there's got to be something better these days that's not public. Maybe people have done something. I haven't found anything. Since Jekyll, I'm just wondering, because Jekyll is so big in the space, right? Seems like a very, #1 problems on everybody's minds, how you would do that. I guess there's other tools now that are integrated where you don't have to use Contentful to begin with. So that landscape was not in a good place, and still today, I think. So how do we solve this? We would have to get into Ruby, right? We would have to marry the two plugins. Vasilis had some background in it, former his Rails days, but I was just getting started in JavaScript. I certainly did not want to take on another fourth language, right? Especially since it's not really a web language, right? So didn't want to go there. But I grew, right? I grew by working on the Jekyll side. I learned Git inside out. Vasilis held my hand. I learned the markup, the CSS. I started teaching. Just within a year, I got so much more comfortable. But that also meant I did this, right? Typical, Elm sent me their content and I put it up, right? Even that taught me a lot though. Was it painful? Yeah. But still, it kind of taught me what is really needed. Is it really straight up blog posts? I mean, what has to happen for something to be published? It's taught me a lot. But I did this for a year. They literally put stuff up on Dropbox. I pulled it down, images. The one thing great about them is they are photographers and they are videographers, obviously, right? So content is never a problem, but mostly small businesses, as you probably know, right? It's a hard time for them to get anything, especially assets, right? It's a huge problem. Never saw with these, always had high quality photography, so that was great. It almost made it fun. But we still haven't fulfilled the contract, right? My wife after me, crazy. They still cannot update the website. What are you doing? Big props to Elm for allowing me to experiment, if you want to call that. They were great. They played along. It was fine for them. They got the website updated. But again, there was still this lingering thing. Yeah, it's great if you do this for us. But ultimately, what we really want is to do that ourselves. And I didn't sit on them. They sent it over to me. I literally put it up within 24 hours. So I want to say I made it work a while. But at the end of the day, still not fulfilled the contract. I just owed it to them. That's it.
Would it have been so hard to teach these people to do it themselves?
Have you ever published to a static site? Text editor, got to commit your changes. Everybody in the room, right? That's hardcore developer stuff. There's no way. There's no way. And that's not, even like WordPress pros.io. Has anybody looked at that? Like very minimalist. I didn't want to go there either. Yeah. Do they still developing that? It's alive, but is it breathing? Barely, right? It was an attempt, right? It's an early attempt for exactly this problem.
Right? That was the guys who wrote the 2012 article. They created it for.
Oh, they did. I didn't realize.
Created it for the healthcare.gov site, but when they were done with it, they did this.
Oh, that's a good backstory. Okay. So now I knew this could be done, right? So back to roots. They had it done. I had it. They laid it out for me in that article I linked to, right? It's all right there. Here's how you do it. And here are the tools to do it. But it also meant what? Literally starting over. But I had the website up now, so I was under the gun in order to get it where it needs to be, but I still had a working website that got updated, so I had the time to just do it on my own. Do I have it quickly? Were they after me? Yes, but I had to do it. But most importantly, I was now ready for Roots, right? I personally, in my developer life, I could look at this and say, this makes sense now. I want to do this. And I firmly, at that point, I made this, I believe in universal JavaScript, right, everywhere. And that's what Roots is. CoffeeScript back then, Spike, fully JavaScript everywhere. And that's what I firmly believe in. But I still remember how I felt that. Like Jeff always on the Gitter channel says, it's just JavaScript, right? Keeps on saying that. And it's great if you know JavaScript, right? Now I'm like, yeah, just, but if as a newcomer coming in, if you look at a config file or app.js, right? Yeah, it's objects and it's arrays. If you don't know what that is, you're out to know, right? We can say it's just JavaScript all day long. But if you have, the faintest idea of the language or barely know, you're the typical front-end Stack Overflow copy kind of guy, it doesn't mean very much to you, right? So a lot of things, what I'm trying to get at, a lot of things had to come together. My personal development. Now I compared the impression when I first looked at Roots, right? I could have started with Roots. Why go into Jekyll if you knew it was not going to work, right? It work in some sense. But a year later, I was in a totally different place, and I embraced it, and I just took it upon myself with the help of the community to get this up and running, right? Totally different. First thing, I say painless, mostly painless, I was. Again, big props to Jeff for making that painless, right? But the first thing I had to do, the one thing I did not want to get into, I didn't want to bite off too much. What does that mean? I wanted to focus on getting it from Jekyll onto Roots and then make the connection to Contentful. I did not want to touch any of the CSS. So the first thing I had to do, if you know anything about Roots, its default configuration is around Jade and Stylus. So that was not going to work. So that was the first hurdle, very small one, right? Again, big props to Roots for being that flexible. You can just swap it out, and you have Sass working. So I literally took my folder, my Bootstrap Sass, and dropped it into Roots, configured Roots to compile Sass, and I was up and running. Like if you look through the repo, there's like 2 commits that I had to make slight changes, and only because I wanted them to the CSS. But that was great. Try that with Jekyll. So again, it's where you are, right? What you're seeking. This flexibility with Roots or with Spike now that we have, we can swap out any part of it. But you need to be ready for that, right? I'm going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but you need to be in a position as a developer, as a person to appreciate that, right? At the beginning, once you're like, just make my website work, right? Once you travel on that journey, you will appreciate that, and I certainly have, right? Is it more responsibility? Way more responsibility on your plate to make it all work, but you are the master of your domain, right? To get Sass running, that was it. And then that was the missing piece, right? Just an actual plugin that worked. Drop it in, and it puts the content not in some file. It doesn't create any pages for me. It puts it where I want it. Okay. Set it up. You still have to create your content types over on Contentful. That's a little bit of a learning curve as well, right? From a WordPress background, again, right? We have post types. They fake other content types with. It's still a post behind the scenes for everything, right? And now you have to do that as well, but it's very flexible. Set that up on Contentful, connect the plugin, pulls it into your blog. Anything you see here is fed from Contentful. Has anybody ever worked with Contentful itself, hooked up to your sites? I mean, I can quickly maybe show what a typical editor sits in front of, right? Oh, maybe not. Typical blog post, right? Let's just see. Let's edit one instead of creating one. Can you see that? I love the edges, right? So your typical fields, right? Very friendly interface for people to work in. There's your date. There's your author. Is it a feature post? Yes or no. Got your titles. Got all your SEO stuff right there. Got your categories and news. And then you're familiar with just the rich text box, right? Where Markdown gets dumped in. So that's where the non-technical people sit in front of now. So now at this point, right, everybody wins. Me as a developer, I get to do whatever I want under the covers, and they can manage their content freely at any time. A little bit of learning curve, probably, but they didn't have any WordPress background much, so there wasn't much retooling or reteaching. They embrace it. They love it. They want to build onto the site, build something out more, build more robust case studies. We can do all that, right? We can literally, what do you have to do in WordPress? There's one plugin that does the, what's that called? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about, right? So here you can do all that on the fly. And they are active. They are very active and making all that work. So it's just been very enjoyable. And it spits out JSON, right? Behind the scenes that I can then consume. Again, I encourage you to check out the repositories if you want to know, get in touch with me or anybody else on how to hook this up and how does it all work. We do the same in Spike now. Just pull it all over. But that's what the Jamstack is all about, right? JavaScript, markup, CSS, JavaScript, pull it all together. We just dropped out the server. Don't need it. But again, right? JSON, what the hell is that, right? Then now you got to worry about arrays. Now you got to worry about indexes. Now you have to be ready for it. Once even as a beginning JavaScript developer, I think you can manage this. Right? What are fields? How are they arranged? One thing maybe I want to highlight is obviously they create videos, right? Let's find a post where I picked the one post where there's. So here, right? That's at the top. That's a proper blog post. They embed videos all the time. That's what they do, right? So they need to showcase their work, whether it's on a blog post or anywhere. So how does that work? That was another little hurdle that I had to overcome that was very interesting with Contentful. Because if you think about it, let's just pull up maybe a longer blog post that has a video. Can we do that? Here, they did some work for the soccer club down in DC, right? So you have a typical blog post here. Here's all your content, and here's an embedded video, right? Which means, what does that mean? Where does that video need to go? Video needs to go in between paragraphs, right? If we go back here, literally is a paragraph here, and then there's one there. So if we go back to Contentful, there's no fields. I can do any of these fields. There's checkboxes, there's regular text fields I can type stuff into, and then I have this big text fields where I can put my content in, I can select my images, and do all kinds of stuff. But how do let me actually find this particular post we were looking at. So we're gonna go post and then DC United, does that? Yeah, there we go. So now we have this particular post right up there. This is what it looks like on the front end. This is what the back end looks like, right? Not a featured post, there's your author, there's your title, regular stuff. Now we want to embed a video. And that's where it is right here. Again, I just have a number and double square brackets. So now, again, another decision to be made, right? Am I feeling comfortable to let them go to Vimeo, to their account, and grab the embed code and dump it in here? That would have been one way, right? But again, very error prone, right? What if something happens during the copy? What do they know, right? I frame this and grab this and put that in there, right? That breaks down very quickly. Roots Contentful to the rescue with transforms. I look at this via regular expressions in JavaScript, two brackets, and what's that number? Anybody guess? What's that number? It's simply the video ID, the Vimeo unique video. Nope, no, I just look for that, and then I explode it. So they can do that, right? I can expect them to go to their Vimeo account, they're all in there all day long, grab this number, wrap it into double brackets, and you're good to go. That's it. That's way cleaner. I just happened to choose the two, I don't know. Yeah, it could have been anything. It's just a regular expression on the other side that explodes that. Under the hood, Jeff can probably explain to you more how that transformation works, right? Just looks for it. I had to write a little bit of code, but then that was like exciting to make that work, right? I wasn't stuck at this place. I can make that happen. Was it hard? Did I have to reach out to 14 people? Yes. But I got it done, and I learned a lot, right? Again, if anybody's interested in the nitty-gritty details of how this works, reach out or just look at the repo. There's a helpers folder there that has all the. It's literally four lines of JavaScript that makes that. But it's just great that I have the ability to do that. And then there's a feature again in Roots Contentful in the plugin that transforms certain things. I call it helper functions that I wrote. So Sass, going from stylus to Sass was a little first hurdle. Learning Jade, right? Getting rid of all the brackets. That I really enjoyed it. By the end of it. Now, these days, like I could not. I don't. Sometimes I have to write a regular markup, and I'm like, oh, this is crazy, right? But it just remind yourself how things change. Even in a short period of time, you develop, and the picture just changes. I wish I could have done a nice little branded thing for Spike too, but I didn't get to that because Jeff had me do all kinds of crazy stuff to it. Anyway, so now what's next, right? What's next? Jack, what was it last month you spoke? Before? 2 months ago? Yeah. Yeah, the last meetup, Jeff told you all about Spike. If you were able to do that, that's the next iteration version of Roots. No more coffee strip, no more stylus. He just put it all in its hat, and it's crazy good, right? And all I do all day long now is that. So that's what my plans are now, right? Attack the other side of it. I mentioned earlier I didn't touch Bootstrap. I'm not a fan of Bootstrap, right? It got us up and running quickly. Not a fan of Sass, so that's next. Get it off of Roots, serves this purpose, and now the next thing I'm going to attack is get it over. Been waiting for Access, obviously, the new CSS framework that Spike plays nice with, and then rewrite the whole thing again. Right? After my time, I can just do it. It's gonna be great. And I really enjoy working for these guys. They appreciate the assets are good. It's just really fun. The Spike Contentful integrations are already there. I've used them on several projects. They're very strong. Jeff has recently made some tweaks to it, so that's all working. It's all working great. I'll probably wait until Jeff rolls us all into Webpack 2. Probably wait until I have really no rush right now. The site works great, right? Any questions? Anything? How am I on time? Bud, you good? So maybe the last thing I want to mention is. So what do we have, right? One thing we didn't touch on yet, I didn't touch on yet, is Netlify, sits in the middle. Very important, right? So you got Roots in the middle, and then you got everything version controlled over there. That's all nice and good, but you still need a capable host that sits in the middle and ties all that together, right? And just Nettlify just blows my mind every single time. I literally this morning, did I close my slides? I have my slides up there as well. It's a Spike site as well. So I literally pushed this up to Nettlify, and it still blows my mind how easy that is, right? Just a little bit. Everything lives on GitHub. Link it up to Nettlify. It grabs everything that's in your master branch, and just like you would build a site locally, it builds it up, spits it out, and you have a life on a first-class CDN. Anybody familiar with these connecting dots, the webhooks? Very important, right? It's essentially a message. People go onto Nettlify, right? Let's say they want to add a blog post right now. They go onto Contentful, put all their content in, they hit publish. Contentful sends a message, we call it a webhook, over to Nettlify. Hey, something has changed, do something. In the case of Spike, it's Spike compile, it runs a command. What was it, roots was it compiled to? I forgot. Roots compile, whatever system you have, Jekyll serve, right? Jekyll build, I think it is. It runs that, but it needs that, right? It needs to be notified that something has changed. It grabs the new content, recompiles your site, and minutes later, it's live. So all that without ever touching the database, right? And again, it's a small business site, even works for bigger sites as well. Obviously, it's not limited in any way. But how often does that change? If they put up a blog post once a month, right? They're not CNN. Like, why does it just has to sit there. It just sits there and it gets served. Putting all these pieces together, that's it. That's how it all works these days. It's just great. And now with the next iterations I see coming along with service workers and all that magic, it's just going to put another layer of just like the browser as the operating system, right? That's becoming a reality soon. Good? Any questions?
Did you give ELM a contact form, and if so, how did you handle that?
I did give them a contact form. Good. I'm glad you brought that up. That's another one, right? One of these things, right? Again, that's the Jamstack. Everything we want to do is a service. We consume services. What is Contentful? Nothing but a database as a service, right? Behind their technology, there's still relational databases. Somebody correct me, gotta be, right? But we don't run this ourselves. We consume whatever we want. The same with something as trivial as a contact form. So now that we no longer really have a server that's capable of sending email, like on the LAMP stack, right? What was it? There was one component in there that's responsible for sending email that WordPress intercepts with, right? You don't have that anymore. So how do you do that? If you inspect the source there, there's at least a couple of services. Let's just quickly check here. What did I use? I forgot. Here's the repo. Contact. Let's see. Form spree. Third-party services. There's another one by the guys of up in Boston. What's that called? This is Form spree, and then they have free plans. And if you want more advanced functionality, ThoughtPod. Yes. What's that called? Yeah, they have it's. Oh yeah, so we don't need. So right now, right, in most new sites, I don't do that anymore. Nettlify will process forms now.
Just put the Nettlify attribute on there.
Right.
Run it, email it.
Right. So let's see here. That's another site. So what do I have here? And then I have a form here. And then all we have, Jeff just mentioned, is just this. That's all it takes, right? Onto the form. And then Netlify will process it. And then you can grab that via API. You can just simply fire off an email. You can fire off a webhook into Slack. That's awesome. So they'll, on their side, they'll tell you, what do you want us to do with this data? Once somebody submits form field, so let me just quickly show you what that looks like on the front end. It's just another form, right? It's the regular form. It gets sent, off it goes, and then Netlify process. I don't know when I did Elm on routes. Was it there? I mean, it might have been there already. It's way more robust now, I think, though. You can do more with the notifications. But it might have been there from the beginning. I don't know. I was just familiar with. But again, right? You're not limited to where you want to see. So that's one way of just running a form. Anything else? You're welcome.